In December 2006, the United States, deeply hostile to the fledgling government of the Union of Islamic Courts in Mogadishu, backed an Ethiopian army invasion of Somalia.
When I saw the Ethiopian forces in Mogadishu and the fighting beginning all over again, I knew it was catastrophic and there was no way to stop it, given the history and the traditional enmity between Ethiopia and Somalia, right from the beginning of the history of the two countries.
And the American support for that effort was quite clear to you as well?
Absolutely, because at night we could hear the drones. Ethiopia has no drones hovering over Mogadishu.
The court's militias were defeated and scattered, and chaos once more reigned in Somalia. In the face of an increasing insurgency, the African Union sent in peacekeeping forces, mainly from Uganda and Burundi. But they were able to do little beyond protect the airport and their own bases. In place of the courts, and bolstered by Somali anger over the invasion, the far more hardlined Islamist Al-Shabaab took up what it portrayed as a jihad against the Ethiopians and their American backers. The former leaders of the union split, Awais throwing in his lot with Al-Shabaab. Where the US had once only imagined an Al-Qaeda-related mass movement, they now had one.
The anger of the Somali people over what has happened to them over the last 3 years, their government taken away, the sworn enemy, the Ethiopians, allowed to run around with their guns and commit human rights violations, and the U.S. role in that. The anger of the Somali people does not need to be informed by Al-Qaeda. Any American who was put through that same exercise by a foreign government would be furious.
Do you think it was a mistake for Ethiopia to have invaded and overthrown the Union of Islamic Courts?
Well, I'm not an expert in that, so I'd be the last to characterize the actions of a nation. What I would say is that an environment that is not stable is an environment that serves no one's interest. Creating stability is in the best interest of all of us.
It's evident, though, that the US-backed toppling of the Islamic courts did nothing to promote stability in Somalia. And now, under the Obama administration, the US is engaged in a spectacular policy backtrack.
The operation was an absolute disaster. And right now, interestingly enough, we're trying to appeal to the moderate elements of the Islamic Courts Union, which we found out later on. Actually, I should say the military found out, and the government officials who supported the action found out later on, were more moderate than we had originally tried to portray.
Indeed, after a UN-mediated peace process in Djibouti in 2008 and an election process by the transitional federal government, the former head of the Islamic Courts Union, Sheikh Sharif, became president of Somalia. And the United States, which only 3 years earlier had been backing efforts to destroy him and his movement, is now backing Sheikh Sharif as Somalia's last and best hope for stability. It was a new relationship consolidated in August 2009 in the US Embassy in Nairobi, Kenya, when Sheikh Sharif met with President Obama's Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton.
President Sheikh Sharif's government has taken up the fight on behalf of the Somali people against Al-Shabaab, a terrorist group with links to Al-Qaeda and other foreign militant networks. And we are supporting the training and equipping of the TFG forces, which is, after all, in the front of this fight to regain control of Somalia away from the violent extremists.
And that's a job which will fall to Africom, coordinated from their base in Djibouti. The commander there is Admiral Anthony Curta.
The role of the Defense Department is to follow the foreign policy of the United States. Our role, if we are tasked with helping the TFG and Sheikh Sharif increase the security capacity of his forces, then we're resourced and ready to do that.
After their meeting, I asked Sheikh Sharif what he had got from Clinton.
runtii dhinaceedana waxaa ka jira diyaargarow aad u fiican iyo faham wanaagsan taasna waxay keentay wixii aan ka dalabnay oo aan ka codsanay inay gacan nagu siiyaan dhammaantood.
And so the US and its Africom command has stepped nearer direct involvement in this war. With the self-declared global jihadists of Al-Shabaab on one side and the US on the other, the stakes are increasingly high. And as so often, the suffering people of Somalia are in the middle.
Ta waxa soo socda iyo sida wax naga doonaan Ilaahay subhanahu wa ta'ala. Laakiin anagu maadaama aan dad muslimiina waxaan ku shaqaynaynaa waxa karaankeena oo aan u aragno wanaag in aan qabanno.
But as Somalia enlists the help of the US to deal with a crisis which arguably the US helped create, is there a lesson to be learned? Could Al-Qaeda become a self-fulfilling prophecy elsewhere in Africa? The Sahel is a vast area, straddling the breadth of North Africa. Much of it is desert and sparsely populated. But this area, running from Eritrea on the east to Senegal on the west, is also a place of valuable resources. Professor Jeremy Keenan, an anthropologist who has spent 40 years studying the Sahel, has advised the UN and several governments on the politics of the region.
The Sahel is becoming increasingly important from a strategic point of view in that it is the second biggest center in the world, or resource area for uranium.
That uranium supplies much of the world's nuclear power industry, while other areas of North Africa hold vital reserves of oil. So it is clearly in the United States' interest to have a presence in the area. And back in the early days of the Bush administration, his strategists came up with a reason. Terrorists.
Terrorist area. Safe haven for extremists. Terrorist organizations operate throughout the Sahel.
That is the beginning of the ideology of the language of the big ungoverned open spaces, terrorists lurking in the Sahara. You've got American generals talking about the Sahara as a swamp of terror. It has to be drained.
I take folks like Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb at their word. The Sahel, vast territories, sparse populations, providing the type of opportunity for those who would wish to do those things to gather, to conduct activities against innocent people. And so I think it is a problem, and the nations of the Sahel recognize it as such as well.
The problem, says Keenan, is that this simply wasn't true. In fact, the area was relatively peaceful. What did happen, says Keenan, was that many autocratic local governments, particularly in Algeria, saw Bush's war on terror as a unique opportunity.
Algeria has a big problem at this time, the beginning of the millennium. It's come out of a civil war, if you like. It's a pariah state. The rest of the world has isolated and shunned it because of human rights problems and all the nastiness of the 1990s. And it wants to get back to the world high table. But particularly, it needs new weaponry for its army. America, on the other hand, is wanting something more amorphous, perhaps. It's trying to legitimize terror in Africa, bearing in mind that what America was trying to do was to militarize Africa, to secure future oil supplies across the continent. It chose to do that by using the war on terror.
So what is the truth? Was the Al-Qaeda threat in the Sahel real, or was it largely a convenient fiction which suited both the Bush administration and some of the more repressive governments of the region? In 2003, an incident took place which seemed to justify the warnings of the military strategists in the US. In March that year, a group calling itself the Salafist Group for Preaching and Combat kidnapped 32 European tourists. This is the group that has since renamed itself Al-Qaeda in the Islamic Maghreb. It was led, claimed the Algerian government, by a man known as El Para.
This big act of terrorism, if you like, was being ramped up by the American administration. Bush was referring to El Para as Osama bin Laden's man in the Sahara. and had declared the Sahara as a big terrorist zone.
On the face of it, this was the proof that all the warnings were true. The Islamic terrorists were on the march in the Sahel. Except, not everything about this story was as it seemed.